Professor Dean often sought refuge in the forgotten corners of Oakhaven, places untouched by the postcard-perfect charm that drew tourists. The old Someone Mill, a skeletal monument of brick and rust on the town's northern edge, was one such sanctuary. Its cavernous interior, smelling of damp earth and decaying machinery, usually offered a quiet counterpoint to the meticulous order of his academic life, a chaotic beauty that resonated with the complex patterns he sought in ancient texts. Today, however, the silence was ruptured, not by the wind whistling through broken panes, but by the insistent, jarring ring of his phone. It was the detective, his voice usually a steady drone, now edged with an unfamiliar urgency. "Dean, you heard anything about Elias Thorne?" Dean's hand, still clutching a fragment of old iron he'd been examining, tightened. "Heard what, Miller?" A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through the usual calm of the mill, an unwelcome premonition. "He's dead, Dean. Someone him this morning. In his study, shot. A guard like a robbery gone wrong." The words hung in the air, echoing off the high ceilings of the mill, transforming its familiar decay into something sinister. Elias Thorne, dead. It was an impossibility. Elias, a pillar of Someone community, a man whose life was as meticulously ordered as the rare books he collected, a man who had helped Dean settle into the town years ago, offering advice and sharing local lore with a quiet generosity. Dean pushed open the mill's creaking main door, stepping out into the crisp autumn air. But the chill he felt was not from the morning breeze. A robbery? Elias Someone lived in a fortress of a house. Tucked away behind ancient oaks, his security measures legendary. And his study? A sanctuary, not a vault. The official explanation, delivered with Miller's usual brusqueness, settled like an ill-fitting shroud over the truth Dean instinctively knew was far more complex. Oakhaven, nestled in the verdant embrace of Someone Mountains, prided itself on its tranquility. A town where the biggest scandal was usually a contested bake-off prize or a particularly zealous garden gnome theft. Its cobblestone streets, lined with quaint boutiques and ivy-clad cottages, seemed to hum with a perpetual gentle peace. The news of a murder, especially one so brutal, felt like a discordant note in a meticulously composed symphony. It was a violation, not just of a man, but of the very fabric of the town's identity, a dark stain on its pristine facade. Dean walked, his mind racing, past the old mill's crumbling walls, down the winding lane that led back towards the heart of Oakhaven. He pictured Elias's study, the heavy oak desk, always impeccably organized, the shelves overflowing with first editions, each one a treasure. Elias was a creature of habit, meticulous to a fault. He never left anything valuable unsecured. And a robbery gone wrong? What exactly had gone wrong? Elias was not a man to resist violently, not if it meant risking his collection. He was a negotiator, a placater. He would have handed over anything demanded, if only to preserve the peace, to protect his beloved books. The idea of him being shot during a struggle felt utterly alien to the man Dean knew. Furthermore, the location of the murder. His study. An officer, a back alley, not a dark street, but the very heart of his private world. A room he guarded with an almost sacred reverence. If a thief wanted valuables, they would ransack the entire house, searching for jewelry, cash, or easily fenced electronics, not just focus on a room filled with books, however rare. Unless, Dean mused, the books were the target. But even then, a single shot? It felt too precise, too personal for a common thief. A thief wanted to get in, get out, and not leave a body that would bring the full weight of the law down upon them. This was messy, deliberate, and entirely out of character for the usual petty crimes that occasionally blighted Oakhaven. He reached the edge of town, the familiar scent of wood smoke and autumn leaves filling the air. Yet it offered no comfort. The image of Elias Thorne, vibrant and alive just days ago, now reduced to a robbery victim, gnawed at him. Dean knew Miller, a good man, but one who preferred simple answers, who saw the world in black and white. This wasn't black and white. This was a kaleidoscope of shadows and unsettling questions. Professor Dean, a man whose life was dedicated to uncovering hidden truths in ancient texts, felt an undeniable pull, a cold certainty that the story Miller was prepared to accept was merely a convenient fabrication. He would have to look closer. He would have to see what Miller might miss. The old threads of Oakhaven's past often led Dean to places like this: the skeletal remains of someone and someone textile mill. A guard rusted gates, perpetually ajar, beckoned him with the promise of forgotten stories, a stark contrast to the manicured lawns of Oakhaven University. Today, however, his visit wasn't for leisure. The whispers of the recent theft from the university's own collection, dismissed by the local constabulary as a mere opportunistic robbery, had snagged in his mind, refusing to be untangled. The official report stated a valuable medieval manuscript, a relatively minor piece, had been taken, along with a few other small, easily pawnable items. Dean, a professor of historical linguistics, found the explanation flimsy, a convenient narrative for a busy police force. His instincts, honed by years of sifting through historical detritus, told him otherwise. He pushed through the main entrance of the old mill, the sound of his worn leather shoes echoing in the cavernous space. Someone motes danced in the slivers of sunlight piercing the grimy windows, illuminating defunct machinery shrouded in cobwebs. The air hung thick with the smell of decay, rust, and damp concrete, the scent of forgotten industry. Dean moved with a scholar's quiet deliberation, his gaze sweeping over the scene, not as a detective searching for fingerprints, but as an archaeologist deciphering a lost civilization. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that the official story felt incomplete. The mill had been abandoned for decades, a monument to Oakhaven's bygone industrial era. It was a place where local teenagers dared each other to explore, and where Dean sometimes found solace from the polite, academic hum of the university. He knew its layout better than most, its hidden nooks and precarious mezzanines. He walked past the massive, silent looms, their metallic skeletons reaching towards the high ceiling like petrified trees. The theft from the university had been tidy, almost too tidy for a common thief. No forced entry, no shattered display cases. A key or someone with access was implied. But the choice of items, particularly the obscure manuscript, had bothered him. It wasn't the most valuable, nor the most easily fensible. He remembered a rumor a few weeks ago about a clandestine meeting held here, deep within the mill's shadows. Someone a snippet of overheard gossip from a student, dismissed at the time. Now it felt significant. He navigated deeper into the factory, towards the old administrative offices, which were less exposed to the elements and casual vandalism. Here the decay was softer, layered with peeling paint and mildewed ledgers scattered across the floor. He reached what used to be the foreman's office, a small room off the main floor, its door hanging precariously on a single hinge. Inside, a heavy wooden desk lay overturned, its drawers ripped open, their contents strewn across the floor. Faded documents, rusted paper clips, a broken ceramic mug. This, he thought, looked more like the aftermath of a robbery. A frantic search, perhaps. But what would a thief be looking for in a derelict foreman's office? Dean knelt, sifting through the debris. Some of it was mundane. Old payroll slips, inventory lists, a tattered copy of a company safety manual. Then his fingers brushed against something cold and metallic beneath a pile of water-damaged blueprints. He pulled it out. It was an ornate, heavy brass compass, its glass face cracked, its needle frozen. It was clearly an antique, perhaps a navigational tool from a bygone era of industry, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. A common thief, he mused, would surely have pocketed this. It had intrinsic value, aesthetic appeal, and could be sold easily. Yet here it lay, discarded amidst the detritus of a ransacked office. This was the first inconsistency. If the motive was simple theft, why leave something so clearly valuable? He set the compass carefully aside and continued his search. His eyes scanned the walls, the floorboards, the ceiling. He noticed a patch of plaster on the far wall, just behind where the desk had stood. It was subtly cleaner than the surrounding grime, a faint rectangle where something had clearly been affixed and then removed. An officer roughly torn off, but carefully detached. He leaned closer, tracing the outline with his finger. The edges were sharp, indicating a precise removal. The plaster within the rectangle was a slightly different shade, revealing what lay beneath. And there, faintly visible in the accumulated dust of the surrounding wall, were the ghost impressions of an intricate design. It wasn't a company logo, nor a simple inscription. It was a complex interlocking pattern of stylized leaves and geometric shapes, surrounding a central, unidentifiable symbol. Dean's breath hitched. He knew that symbol. Or rather, he recognized its style. It wasn't common, not something from Oakhaven's public history. He had seen similar motifs, buried deep within the university's restricted archives, in dusty texts pertaining to the earliest, most esoteric academic societies of Oakhaven University. A detective were groups often dismissed as eccentric, their pursuits deemed too abstract or obscure for modern scholarship. One particular society, the Keepers of the Verdant Scroll, had used a strikingly similar emblem, though its exact meaning had been lost to time. They were said to have studied ancient languages, forgotten sciences, and the very structure of knowledge itself. The compass, untouched, the carefully removed plaque, the distinctive symbol. This wasn't a robbery. This was a targeted extraction. Someone hadn't come for the value of the object, but for the information it contained, or the authority it represented. The factory wasn't the scene of the crime, but a waypoint, a place where something vital had been hidden, or perhaps where a key piece of a larger puzzle had been retrieved. Dean stood, his mind racing. The medieval manuscript from the university, the one declared stolen, had also contained obscure linguistic patterns, hinting at a coded text. Someone the two be connected? The robbery at the university now seemed like a deliberate misdirection. The real target was something far older, far more significant, something tied to the very foundations of Oakhaven University. The whispers of the past, once faint, now spoke with a chilling clarity. He had to get back to the archives. He had to find out what the Keepers of the Verdant Scroll truly guarded. The stench of decay was a physical presence, clinging to Dean's clothes, his hair, his very skin. He stood frozen, the beam of his flashlight cutting a stark path through the gloom, illuminating the skeletal remains. Not just old bones, but a recent, brutal end. The tattered remnants of clothing, the way the body lay. It spoke of abandonment, of a life extinguished and then forgotten. Until now. This was no ancient history, no archaeological puzzle. This was a crime scene, fresh enough for its horror to still resonate in the dust-choked air. His mind, usually a well-oiled machine of deduction and historical recall, sputtered. He had come here chasing whispers of Oakhaven's past, drawn by the town's peculiar silence regarding its own origins, and by Thorne's unsettling pronouncements. Now he'd stumbled into something far more immediate and terrifying. He forced himself to move, his boots crunching on broken glass and rusted metal shards. He kept the flashlight trained on the skeleton, circling it slowly, careful not to disturb anything. The remains lay in a collapsed section of the mill, partially obscured by a fallen beam and rusted machinery. This was the Colleague and Someone textile mill, a name that had always struck Dean as odd, almost like a coded reference. The textiles themselves, long gone to rot, held no clues here, but the name. Dean squatted, peering closer. A small, tarnished metal locket lay near the skeleton's right hand, barely visible beneath a layer of dust. He picked it up with a gloved hand, careful not to smudge any potential prints. It was heavy, intricately engraved, but the design was unfamiliar. Not a family crest he recognized, nor any common Oakhaven symbol. On the reverse, etched almost invisibly, were 3 interlocking oak leaves. The Oakhaven Guardians. The name, often whispered in hushed tones by local historians, was more legend than fact. A secret society, some claimed, founded in the town's earliest days, dedicated to protecting its true heritage. Someone dismissed them as mere folklore, a romanticized notion of a bygone era. Dean, however, had found too many inconsistencies in the official town records, too many conveniently missing pages to discount them entirely. The university's archives, in particular, had always felt like a carefully curated narrative, with gaping holes where the Guardians might have once stood. He remembered Thorne's recent rambling lectures, punctuated by veiled warnings about those who stand sentinel over forgotten truths. Dean had initially dismissed them as Thorne's usual academic dramatics, but now, holding the locket, the words echoed with a chilling new clarity. Someone speaking of the Guardians? Or was he one of them? Dean's gaze swept the factory floor again, no longer just searching for historical artifacts, but for secrets. The Guardians, if they were real, would have left more than just a locket. This mill, with its evocative name, its deep-seated connection to Oakhaven's industrial past, suddenly felt like a key piece of their legacy. What if the colleague and someone weren't just business partners, but code for the Guardians themselves, or their operatives? He moved towards a sturdy-looking, intact section of wall, running his hand over the cold brick. He was looking for anomalies, for anything that didn't quite fit. A loose brick, a faint outline of a door, a hidden compartment. His fingers brushed against something rough, a small square indentation in the mortar. He pressed it, and with a soft click, a section of the wall, disguised to look like a support pillar, swung inward. A guard lay a narrow, dusty passage, leading into deeper darkness. The air within was stale, but devoid of the pervasive decay of the mill. Dean hesitated for only a moment. The skeletal remains, the locket, Thorne's cryptic warnings. They all converged here, in this hidden passage. This was where the Oakhaven Guardian's legacy began to truly unravel. He stepped inside, his flashlight beam piercing the inky blackness. The passage opened into a small, circular chamber. In the center, on a pedestal carved from dark, polished wood, lay a heavy, leather-bound ledger. Some on the walls, faded tapestries depicted scenes of early Oakhaven, but with curious stylized figures observing from the shadows, each bearing the 3 interlocking oak leaves. Dean approached the ledger, his heart pounding a rhythm against his ribs. The cover was embossed with the same oak leaf emblem. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with elegant looping script, dated from the late 19th century. It wasn't a financial record, nor a simple journal. It was a roster, names, dates, and next to many of the names, cryptic notes. Custodian of someone gate, keeper of someone watch, the officer of truths. And then, Dean saw it. A detective down a page, a familiar name. Thorne. Not the current Thorne, but an ancestor, perhaps. The date next to it was 1898. The note. Someone of whispers. The university's hidden past. Thorne's family legacy, the Oakhaven Guardians. They were all intertwined, a complex tapestry woven with threads of forgotten history and dangerous secrets. Dean realized with a jolt that he hadn't just found a clue. He had stumbled into the heart of the mystery, a place where the Guardians' watchful eyes might still be fixed, even after all these years. He was no longer just an observer. He was now a part of their story, and the chilling thought settled in his gut. What did the Guardians do to those who uncovered their truths? The skeleton in the mill provided a grim answer. The stench of decay, a cloying, sickly sweet miasma, intensified with every beat of Dean's hammering heart. His flashlight beam, a shaky spear against the oppressive darkness, finally settled. It found Thorn. Someone against a massive rust-eaten press, Thorn's form was barely recognizable. Time and whatever creatures found solace in forgotten places had taken their toll. Dean's stomach lurched, but he forced himself to breathe through his mouth, focusing on the grim task. This wasn't just a body, it was a key. He approached cautiously, the crunch of shattered glass and loose debris under his boots echoing in the vast, silent factory. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of damp concrete and something unspeakably old. Dean knelt, ignoring the urge to recoil. Thorn's clothes, what remained of them, were tattered, but in his stiffened right hand, clutched with a death grip, was something small and metallic. Dean carefully pried it free. It was a tarnished silver locket, intricately carved with a symbol Dean had only ever seen in hushed whispers and obscure texts. A stylized, interlocking trinity of circles, each with a single watchful eye at its center. The mark of the Guardians. Thorn hadn't just been involved, he'd been deep within their ranks. A quick professional search of Thorn's remaining pockets yielded another item, tucked into a now brittle inner jacket lining. A small, water-damaged notebook. Some of the pages were fused, but a few near the center had resisted the damp. Dean carefully peeled them apart, the paper flaking at his touch. The script, though faded, was Thorn's, neat and precise. He held the beam steady, deciphering the words. A list of titles, not names, caught his eye first. The Architect, the Chronicler, the Enforcer, the Guard Them. A series of fragmented sentences, scrawled with an urgency that seemed to bleed through the page. The pact broken, the yield corrupted, the foundation trembles. And then a specific notation, underlined twice. Oseat, 17th, Someone Mill. Dean's mind raced. Thorn hadn't just died. He'd been investigating something specific, something that threatened the very core of the Guardians. The pact broken implied a fundamental betrayal of their principles. The yield corrupted suggested a misuse of resources, power, or perhaps even a physical asset. And the foundation trembles. That was a warning of internal collapse, a schism. He looked back at the titles. The Architect, the Chronicler, the Enforcer. Some weren't arbitrary names. They were roles, positions of power within the Guardians, likely held by individuals of considerable influence in the city. Thorn had been onto something dangerous enough to get him murdered and dumped in this forgotten place. Dean remembered the detective's cryptic warning about Thorn dabbling in things best left alone. This was it. Thorn wasn't just a rogue academic. He was an insider who had discovered a profound corruption within his own secret society. The locket confirmed his allegiance, and the notebook detailed the betrayal. The old mill was a derelict industrial site on the outskirts of the city, long abandoned like this factory. What could have happened there on October 17th? Someone at where the yield was being corrupted, or where the pact was truly broken. Dean stood, the locket and notebook now carefully secured. The stench of decay still clung to him, but it no longer paralyzed him. Instead, it fueled a cold resolve. He now had a clearer picture of Thorn's final days. A man desperately trying to expose a rot within his own order, a rot facilitated by three powerful unnamed figures. His list of potential suspects, once a vague cloud of shadows, now had distinct archetypes. The Architect. Someone who planned, who built, perhaps controlled the city's physical growth or its grand schemes. The Chronicler. A keeper of secrets, of history, of forbidden knowledge. Someone who might manipulate information. The Enforcer. The one who acted, who ensured obedience, who dealt with inconvenient truths. Dean knew the city well enough to identify whispers, rumors of powerful individuals who fit these roles, people who operated with an unusual degree of immunity. He didn't have names yet, but he had titles and a specific date and location. The web was beginning to unravel, piece by agonizing piece. And Dean knew his next stop had to be the officer mill. It wasn't the smell of death, not exactly. It was more chemical, organic, but manipulated. A processing plant for something vile, yet disturbingly familiar. And then it clicked. Someone a body, but a source. A specific putrid aroma that Dean had encountered only once before in Thorne's meticulous notes, describing an ancient, almost mythical fungus, Fungus mortis. A rare, highly toxic organism, said to rapidly decompose organic matter, leaving behind a signature, sickly sweet odor. Thorne's research had dismissed it as folklore, a relic of medieval anxieties. But here, the air was thick with its unmistakable signature. Dean swept his light across the vast, empty space, past rust-eaten machinery and shadowed corners, until he found it. Someone away behind a collapsed section of wall, illuminated by a single, grimy skylight, was a makeshift laboratory. A guard vats bubbled with viscous, dark liquids. Someone coils snaked between propane tanks. Someone racks held desiccated blackish-green specimens, unmistakably the fungus mortis Thorne had merely theorized about. This wasn't a factory for textiles or heavy machinery anymore. It was a clandestine farm, a silent, reeking incubator. Thorne wasn't just an archivist, he was an investigator. He hadn't just read about the fungus. He'd found evidence of its cultivation. And the Guardians, they weren't just preserving ancient knowledge. They were exploiting it. A faint scuff of a shoe on the concrete floor behind him sent a jolt through Dean. He spun, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Someone emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the weak light filtering through a distant window. It was someone Davies, his usually placid face now etched with a grim, almost fanatical resolve. "Dean," Davies said, his voice unnervingly calm. "You were always too sharp for your own good. A true detective, like Thorne." "Thorne found you, didn't he?" Dean's voice was steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "He found this place. He found out what the Guardians were truly guarding." Davies took a step forward, his eyes glinting in the faint light. He was getting too close, an officer curious. The fungus mortis. It's a delicate secret, Dean. A power beyond your comprehension. Power? Dean scoffed, gesturing around the makeshift lab. You were cultivating a poison, Davies. For what? Control? Profit? Thorne was going to expose you. He found your lab, he found your methods, and you killed him with his own research. Davies's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Thorne understood the potential. The ancient texts speak of its ability to cleanse the unworthy, to bring clarity to those who wield it. A slow, subtle agent of influence. But he lacked the vision. He saw only destruction, where we saw order. Dean's mind raced, piecing together the final horrifying details. Thorne's heart attack. It wasn't natural. You used an extract from this fungus. A detective that mimicked a natural cause, something that left no trace in a standard autopsy. Only that faint, lingering odor that I dismissed as mere decay. You thought you were clever, didn't you? You even tried to lead me away, subtly suggesting other avenues, all while knowing the truth was festering here. A necessary measure, Davies conceded, his voice losing its calm, a manic edge creeping in. Thorne's journal, his notes on fungus mortis. He was going to publish. He was going to shatter centuries of careful stewardship. Someone exists to guide, to protect humanity from its own destructive impulses. This was merely a tool to ensure that guidance. Guidance? Dean retorted, his voice rising. You mean control. You are planning to use this fungus to manipulate people, to silence dissent, to cleanse anyone who didn't fit your twisted vision of order. Thorne saw it for what it was, a perversion of knowledge, and you murdered him for it. Davies' eyes narrowed, his hands clenching at his sides. He left us no choice, and now, neither do you. He lunged, not with a weapon, but with the desperate fury of a man cornered. Dean sidestepped, bringing his flashlight up, not to strike, but to momentarily blind Davies. The beam caught Davies squarely in the eyes, making him recoil with a grunt. In that split second, Dean saw his opportunity. He knew the killer's identity, the motive, and the horrifying truth behind Thorne's murder and the Guardian's secrets. A guard that remained was to ensure Davies' reign of twisted order ended here, amidst the reeking vats and the silent testimony of the fungus mortis. It wasn't the broken machinery he had expected, nor the simple debris of a collapsing structure. It was a shallow, hastily dug pit, obscured by a tarp and a scattering of industrial waste, from which the putrid odor emanated with an almost physical force. He swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising in his throat. The tarp, disturbed by his clumsy approach, had shifted just enough. What it revealed wasn't a whole form, but enough to confirm his darkest suspicions. A glimpse of pallid skin, the dark fabric of a jacket, and the unmistakable ghastly outline of a human hand. This was it. The missing pieces, the whispered fears, the lurking dread that had clung to the town like a shroud. They had all converged here, in this forgotten corner of the derelict factory. A wave of nausea washed over him, threatening to buckle his knees. He stumbled back, clutching the grimy wall for support, his breath catching in ragged gasps. The adrenaline that had propelled him through weeks of searching now threatened to consume him entirely. He wanted to run, to flee this place of horror, but a cold, hard resolve, born of his relentless pursuit of the truth, rooted him to the spot. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling so violently he almost dropped it. The detective's number was already on speed dial. Dean found it. Dean rasped into the receiver, his voice barely a whisper, yet resonating with a terrifying certainty. The factory, the back corner. You need to send everyone. The hours that followed blurred into a surreal sequence of flashing lights, hushed voices, and the methodical work of investigators. The detective arrived, his face grim. His usual composed demeanor replaced by an almost tangible weariness. He nodded at Dean, a silent acknowledgement of the terrible burden he had carried, and the even greater one he had just uncovered. Dean stood aside, shivering despite the mild night air, watching as the factory, once a symbol of the town's industrial past, transformed into a crime scene. Its secrets finally dragged into the unforgiving glare of floodlights. The news spread like wildfire through the town by morning. The identity of the victim, a local man who had vanished months ago, was soon confirmed. The subsequent investigation, fueled by Dean's discovery, quickly unraveled a network of petty grudges and desperation, culminating in a confession from a former associate of the victim, whose motive, when finally revealed, felt depressingly mundane against the backdrop of such profound horror. It wasn't the grand, intricate conspiracy Dean had sometimes imagined in his darker moments, but a chillingly human tragedy. In the days that followed, Dean became an unwitting local hero, though the title felt hollow and ill-fitting. Someone approached him in the street, offering words of gratitude and awe, but he found it difficult to accept. He hadn't sought glory. He had simply sought an answer, a closure that now felt more like a gaping wound. The scent of decay, though no longer physically present, seemed to linger in the back of his mind, a phantom reminder of what he had witnessed. Someone became a battle, haunted by fragmented images of the pit, the hand, and the chilling emptiness of the factory. His perspective had irrevocably shifted. The familiar streets of his town, once a comforting backdrop to his quiet life, now held a new, unsettling depth. He saw the shadows beneath the friendly smiles, the unspoken anxieties in people's eyes. The world, which he had once viewed with a certain detached optimism, now seemed more fragile, more complex, and undeniably darker. He understood now that evil wasn't always a distant, monstrous entity, but often a quiet rot, festering in the mundane corners of everyday life, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Yet, amidst the lingering unease, a different kind of clarity emerged. He had faced the darkness, not as a professional, but as an ordinary man driven by an instinct for truth. He hadn't flinched when confronted with the ugliness, hadn't turned away. He had seen it through to the end, and in doing so, had brought a measure of peace to a grieving family and justice to a quiet town. He realized that perhaps his previous aimlessness hadn't been a flaw, but a quiet preparation. His meticulous nature, his tendency to notice the small, overlooked details, had not been a quirk, but a tool. Dean found himself walking the familiar paths with a new gait, a subtle change in his posture. He still noticed the rustling leaves, the shifting clouds, but now he also saw the discarded wrapper in the gutter, the flicker of apprehension in a stranger's glance. He understood that while some mysteries were solved, life itself remained an intricate tapestry of hidden threads. He wasn't a detective, and he wouldn't seek out new horrors. But he was no longer blind to them either. The world was not simpler, but he was, in a strange way, more present in it. He carried the weight of what he had seen, but also the quiet strength of having looked into the abyss and not fallen in. The factory stood, still derelict, but its silence was no longer a secret, but a solemn echo of a truth finally revealed. Dean, too, stood, changed, but unbroken.